These are reversible and preventable conditions. The chronic diseases, the heart disease, the cancer, the stroke, it's the same metabolic syndrome and all of its associations. Yeah. It's the same obesity and diabetes and high blood pressure and all the consequences of dietary excess. These are reversible and preventable conditions. People don't have to have these conditions. And even if they have them, they can largely reverse them by taking responsibility to control what they put in their mouth.
Meet Dr. Alan Goldhamer, a pioneer in the world of therapeutic fasting and natural healing. As the founder of TrueNorth Health Center in Santa Rosa, California, he's been leading one of the world's only clinics dedicated to medically supervised, water-only fasting, and he's been doing it since 1984. That's over 40 years of helping people heal by simply letting the body do what it was designed to do.
We've been doing this for 40 years. We've had 25,000 people undergo water-only fasting. So far, of the 25,000 people that have walked in, 25,000 people have walked out, and we work real hard to maintain our safety protocol by making sure we go through history, exam, lab, and monitoring on every patient that we treat.
Do you think water-only fasting sounds extreme? Just wait. Dr. Goldhamer's approach has not only transformed tens of thousands of lives, but even caught the attention of the British Medical Journal, which published a case study on the successful treatment of lymphoma cancer using fasting and a strictly vegan, SOS-free diet, no salt, oil, or sugar. So what is water-only fasting?
Water-only fasting is complete abstinence of all substances except pure water.
Dr. Goldhamer strongly advocates water-only fasting under medical supervision, emphasizing that many chronic health issues including weight gain stem from poor dietary habits and the overconsumption of highly processed foods.
One of the problems with people today is that they're getting their satiety mechanisms fooled. So the normal thing that keeps people from becoming overweight is that when they're eating whole natural foods, and they get to a certain point, their brain signals them they've had enough. But when we use highly processed refined carbohydrates and animal foods, the brain can be fooled. And so people will consistently eat more than they need in order to maintain optimum weight. And so they gain weight. Of that fat, some of it's something called visceral fat. Visceral fat is the type of fat that tends to accumulate around the belly and the organs. And it behaves differently than regular adipose tissue in that it produces inflammation and inflammatory products. It has an effect very much like a tumor. So it's hypermetabolic. It produces these inflammatory products. And those inflammatory products lead to very specific diseases: cardiovascular disease, diabetes, autoimmune disease, and some forms of cancer, including lymphoma. And as a consequence, large numbers of people that are becoming overweight, which is what 72% of the population are now overweight or obese, have lots of fat and lots of visceral fat and lots of inflammation, and they're getting these diseases. And it's interesting because people treat these diseases as if they're completely separate, unrelated entities. In fact, you have to go to different doctors even to be evaluated and treated for these different, seemingly unrelated diseases, when in reality, they all have a common contributing cause, and that's the dietary excess that leads to the fat, that leads to the visceral fat, that leads to the inflammation that causes the disease.
Dr. Goldhamer emphasizes following an SOS-free diet as a key strategy to escape what he calls the pleasure trap, which is also the title of his groundbreaking book.
And the way the brain reinforces the body's behavior is by rewarding us with dopamine, which is the neurochemical associated with pleasure. So the more dopamine, the more pleasure. The more dopamine, the better the food tastes. And so you react to food in response to largely caloric density. The higher the caloric density, the more valuable it is in this environment of scarcity in which we evolved. And so the higher caloric density foods tend to be more reinforced, more dopamine, better tasting. So what we've done as humans, we're innovative creatures. We said, if a little good, a lot's better. Let's figure out a way to make the food taste even more special by increasing its caloric density. And we do that by adding things like oil and sugar to the food. And as a consequence, we like it better. And if that's what you get used to eating, that's all you like. And eventually people get to the point they really don't like the taste of simple whole natural foods anymore, because this hyper drug-like stimulating effect of the more concentrated foods is more appealing. So we literally become addicted.
Once people become addicted to a high dopamine diet loaded with salt, oil, and sugar, breaking free from those habits can be challenging. It takes time for the body and brain to readjust to truly healthy, whole foods.
For example, sodium, people use on high sodium diet. It takes about a month on a low sodium diet for the average person to neuroadapt to a lower salt diet. With fat, it takes almost 3 months. And that's what we found with fasting. And sometimes that's a way of getting people to the point where good food tastes good more quickly. Once they've gotten out of that pleasure trap, and it's easier to get people to eat healthy foods.
Why is SOS-free diet so important?
With oil, they realize a highly fractionated food product like oil
high caloric density, little satiety feedback, they can understand that. Sugar, pretty well accepted that refined carbohydrates, they cause your insulin levels to rise, and then it drives your sugars lower, and it fools the brain, and now you got cravings, and that's what a lot of the binging and craving and stuff comes around, is because of physiological alterations of refined carbohydrates. But salt also is a really important part of this, and let's talk about a few reasons why that might be. Number one, salt is an essential nutrient. That is sodium. It is an essential nutrient, without which you die. Fortunately, you get all of the sodium you need in a whole natural food diet, just like you get all the sugar you need and all the oil you need. You don't have to add a fractionated concentrated food to get the amount of sodium, the milligrams of sodium that's needed to sustain optimum health. Salt also has a powerful effect on passive overeating. And you can do an experiment yourself. If you just sit down and figure out how much brown rice you'd eat until you feel satisfied, until you don't want any more. And on a different day, everything else being equal, salt it up and see, you'll eat significantly more before you feel satisfied. Now, some people say, yeah, it tastes better. Well, what do you think tasting better means? It means it's stimulating more dopamine in the brain as a result of this artificial type response. And you will systematically eat more on heavily salted foods when you're adapted to that than you will whole natural foods. By eliminating the sodium from the diet, you also eliminate a lot of the highly fractionated foods that you just can't eat without salt. Yeah. Even products like bread and cookies and crackers and a lot of this stuff without the salt really doesn't taste that good because they've refined out most of the natural flavors of the food. And what they do is they take these federally subsidized grains like wheat and soy and corn, and they add oil, salt, and sugar to it, process it into various looking foods, and call that the diet. Go into a grocery store and walk around, and you'll see a lot of those foods are really nothing more than one grain or the other with various concentrations of sugar, oil, and salt.
In order to eat SOS-free diet, fasting plays a very important role.
Well, there's actually a literature on that. We know that, for example, with sodium, it takes people on average about a month to neuroadapt to a low-salt diet. With a low-fat diet, what's interesting, it can take as much as 3 months. So for 3 months, people don't feel satisfied when they're eating a healthy diet that's lower in fat, low in sodium, etc. But if you eat the diet long enough, eventually it comes around, but it's hard to get people to eat well for a month or 3 months. After fasting, that change happens very rapidly. And so now good foods taste good. And so it's a useful tool at helping people escape the dietary pleasure trap and get back into eating a whole plant foods diet, which is really the long-term ultimate solution to many of these problems.
Before we dive into the specific foods Dr. Goldhamer recommends, let's first explore an important step: how to safely reintroduce food after a water-only fast, whether you've fasted for just a few days or up to 40. Refeeding.
Time to refeed, that refeeding process be done appropriately. Too rapid a refeeding can result in very potentially serious problems, including refeeding syndrome or post-fasting edema, problems that can be very serious. So you don't want to take a person that's gone through fasting and then not appropriately refeed. Proper refeeding is perhaps one of the most important parts of the fast, and it's also when people get used to eating the whole plant food SOS-free diet that's going to be necessary to sustain the results that they've achieved during fasting. If you introduce them too rapidly, for example, to a high sodium intake, they can retain fluid, post-fasting edema, which cause swelling and other problems. Right. When a person goes through, say, a 20-day water-only fast, it'll take 10 days, about half the length of the fast, to carefully and slowly realimate them so that they're back to eating a whole plant food SOS-free diet.
You might be wondering a few things about fasting. For example, is water-only fasting more effective than intermittent fasting?
Intermittent fasting protocols are just that, fasting mimicking diets or fasting mimicking programs, trying to reproduce some of the changes that we know occur with fasting without the risk profile or the complications of long-term water-only fasting. And I think they can be very effective, as they've demonstrated. However, long-term water-only fasting has a much more profound impact on these mechanisms that are associated with fasting. That yes, you lose a bunch of weight fasting and you regain some weight after fasting, but it turns out the weight you regain after fasting when you're eating a whole plant food diet is exclusively water, fiber, glycogen, and protein. There is no fat. In fact, the fat profile continues to drop during refeeding. Not just do you lose fat, but you preferentially lose visceral fat. That the ratio of visceral fat to adipose tissue loss is 3.0. There's a significant preferential mobilization of this very type of fat that we think is most compromising to health.
And how many days of fasting are considered safe or beneficial?
What we do is we want to fast as short as possible, but long enough to get the problem resolved. And so it's not like we're setting out to try to beat Jesus in fasting duration. We don't go over 40 days generally, because if you keep the fast under 40 days, there's few metabolic complications.
Dr. Alan Goldhamer and his team at TrueNorth Health Center offer medically supervised water-only fasting programs ranging from just a few days to up to 40 days, depending on individual needs. Each program also includes a refeeding phase, typically half the length of the fast, to safely reintroduce food and support long-term dietary change. Dr. Goldhamer and the culinary team at TrueNorth Health Center offer plenty of valuable and practical tips for adopting this way of eating. A typical day of SOS-free meals is simple yet satisfying, focused on whole, unprocessed ingredients that nourish and fill you without triggering the pleasure trap. Breakfast is often light and clean, typically consisting of simple whole foods like steamed greens, fresh fruit, or plain oatmeal. The goal is to start the day with foods that support digestion and don't overstimulate the palate.
And the TrueNorth Health Center serves only whole plant food, SOS-free food. So there's no temptations. It's very easy. We come in, we have oftentimes a grain like oatmeal or corn. We have fresh fruit or greens. I may have some nuts or seeds or flax seeds or something for breakfast, depending on the day.
For lunch and dinner, vegetables take center stage. Dr. Goldhamer often begins with a large, colorful salad made with a base of fresh lettuce, topped with red bell pepper, cucumber, celery, cherry tomatoes, avocado, and raw pumpkin seeds. As a main course, he enjoys whole grain or legume-based pasta topped with a savory vegetable sauce. This sauce is made from tomatoes or tomato puree that contain no added salt, oil, or sugar. Into the sauce, he adds a medley of sautéed vegetables such as leeks, eggplant, spinach, and tofu, cooked without oil. The meal is typically rounded out with a generous portion of steamed vegetables like broccoli, mustard greens, or kale, offering both flavor and satiety. Dessert is optional and usually unnecessary, as the meals themselves are designed to be both filling and nutritionally complete. However, if there's room, a simple serving of fresh fruit such as sweet, hydrating melon makes a naturally satisfying end to the meal. Some of you might be wondering, how is it even possible to cook without salt or oil? Thankfully, Chef Ramses Bravo, head chef at TrueNorth Health Center, has plenty of creative solutions. Instead of using oil, he often recommends a splash of fresh orange juice to add both moisture and a subtle sweetness to dishes.
The idea is to cook something very quickly, and in order to do that, we use a very small amount of liquid, which in that case was 1 orange. So we used the juice from 1 orange to create steam very quickly because it was only a small amount. And by the time the liquid is used up, the vegetables, in that case the asparagus and the onions and the artichoke hearts, were done. You use your heat medium liquid, but it also adds flavor because of the orange. But as soon as you don't use oil, that helps a lot because you're not coating your taste buds with this oily substance that prevents the flavor from getting in. Thus, it helps you not having to have the salt in there.
And when it comes to replacing salt, he suggests loading your meals with flavorful herbs and spices. Think of it not as restriction, but as an opportunity to explore a new world of natural taste.
There is no actual need for salt in your thing. What I focus on is flavor, okay? So we got to give a lot of flavor to your taste buds so you register a lot of flavor and then you're not missing the salt. Granulated onion or granulated garlic work really well. So if you take, for example, we do a lot of roasted potatoes. So we cut them in half and we sprinkle with granulated onion or garlic, not powder, granulated, and then we roast them in the oven. And by the time they're done cooked, they have this really nice brown look to them. So again, we caramelize the natural sugar in the potato. Sugars, that's the easiest actually. So I use a lot of dried fruits, apricots, dates, raisins, prunes, dried mangoes, and a lot of fruit juices, orange juice, pineapple juice, apple juice.
Now you have a clearer understanding of how water fasting works and why it can be such a powerful tool for healing. Just remember, water-only fasting should always be done under professional supervision. For more in-depth guidance, be sure to check out resources from TrueNorth Health Center or Dr. Goldhamer's official publications. The key takeaway.
Here's what you need to do. First, get enough sleep, because it's your most critical activity. Then engage in regular exercise so you can dissipate the tension, you can build fitness, and have the time to prepare and eat healthy food.